evening, everybody. My name is Saana Kallioinen, and I'm very pleased to be welcoming you to this Saana Kallioinen's Australia evening. This event is organized by the Social Committee of the Helsinki Finnish-British Society. The Society is a non-profit organization that was founded in 1926, so this year is our 95th anniversary. And our values are inclusiveness, diversity, and lifelong learning. And I trust that we will see something for all these things this evening. The Society's Social Committee organizes various social events and activities for the moment, either hybrid or online, but we hope to be having picnics, meetings in pubs, etc. soon again. And these events are open to anybody with an interest in the society. And our speaker tonight, Saana Kallioinen, was born in Australia, in Brisbane, Queensland, to an Australian mother and Finnish father. And she has been living in Finland for the last 12 years and been involved in the society for the last 7 years. And she's now here to tell us of the land of her birth, Australia.
Thank you, Laura. So, as the title says, Australia, or better known as the land down under. So this is a picture of me. We went to Byron Bay, which is the most easterly point of Australia, and this is, you can see how beautiful the ocean is. That's where I'd rather be when Finnish winter is on in Australia. So as you can see, I just mentioned that I'm Brisbane born and raised. I've been living 12 years here in Helsinki, and I'm a journalist, editor and translator by training. So Australia is a relatively young country. We have a history of less than 250 years. As most of you know, Australia was originally started as a penal colony for all the British criminals that they didn't know what else to do with. And then later on, free settlers came, and then also we opened up for the gold rushes for people from other countries such as China. And then in the 1900s, we took a lot of people from Greece and Italy, and then Vietnam, and then Australia became the melting pot as we know it today. So it was federated in 1901. There are 6 states and 2 territories. The capital of Australia is Canberra, which is also a city, and it's the Australian Capital Territory, which has a very unique position in Australia. There are 250 Indigenous languages, and with a population of approximately 25.36 million, and over 36% of the population have been born abroad. So as you can see, Australia is very diverse in terms of its history and its cultural and ethnic and linguistic makeup. Now, just to talk to you about some Indigenous place names that are quite interesting to English speakers. A couple of places that I particularly like the sound of are Wagga Wagga, Woolloongabba, Menangatang, and Bong Bong. Now, Woolloongabba is actually located in my hometown in Brisbane, very close to where I went to high school, so it means meeting place by the creek or something along those lines. So all of these places have very special names associated to the local Indigenous languages of the people who live there. Okay, so Australia also has, although it's very diverse and varied in terms of culture and language, also in terms of landscape. So from its snow-capped peaks of the Australian Alps, that you didn't know you could ski in Australia, to its wildlife-rich coral reefs, biodiverse tropical rainforest, and dust-filled deserts, there's an environmental landscape for everyone. So, just to make a point about how big Australia actually is, as you can see from the map on the left, I'm sorry it's a little blurry, but this is North America. And from this you can see just how broad Australia actually is in terms of its, like from Brisbane on the east coast here to Perth, which is on the west coast, it's as wide as the US. And again, it's wider than Europe, from Ukraine and Belarus in the east Australia is broader than Ireland and Portugal in the west. A lot of people here in Europe don't actually realise just how big Australia actually is. And my home city, Brisbane, is on the east coast, where that big red dot is about halfway down if you drew a horizontal line through Australia. And from Brisbane to Perth, you can see Perth on the other map here, it's the big red dot on the west coast, is about 4,000 kilometres. So when people ask me, oh, haven't you been to Perth? And I say no, they're like, oh, but it's so close. No, it's not really. It's about, like we said, it's like having a day trip from eastern Ukraine to Portugal or even further. So we like our rocks in Australia. Two of the most common known ones are Uluru, which used to be known as rock, but given that we're now acknowledging the traditional landowners and the indigenous name, the name is now recognised as Uluru, and it's actually no longer possible to climb the rock because it's very significant to the indigenous population, and it's seen as disrespectful to do so. And then on the right we have the Seven Sisters, a couple of which unfortunately have collapsed into the sea in recent years, so you can see there's only a few of them left. And just talking about the variety of landscapes, as you can see here, we have mountains, we have rivers, and then we have rocks again. One interesting fact about Australia is we don't really have any proper lakes. We only have salt lakes, which usually are more like mud flats with salt on them. So in Finland, which is known as a land of 1,000 lakes, that's one thing I definitely appreciate here. And just an assortment of different landscapes here. You can see we have the sea, we have waterfalls, and actually I just threw this picture in here because it was such a good shot. My dad took this in 2018 of the dolphin jumping out. This was on the same day we were at Byron Bay, so the one I mentioned in the earlier picture. And then you can see here on the bottom left, is a picture of bush. This is like an example of what a lot of the bush that was destroyed in the bushfires in Australia at the end of 2018, early 2019 looks like. And these parts of Australia, particularly in the southern states, are now very severely affected by flooding as well. A lot of people wouldn't know that we have very severe droughts, floods, cyclones, and fires. So I have a saying, if snakes don't kill you, the weather will, or something else will. Everything's out to get you, basically. And this is on the very far left this is one of my favourite views. It's like when you have that little segue between the suburbia and the beach, and you can look straight down into the beach. It's just one of my favourite pictures, so I thought I'd share it there. And these strange looking brown nuts, these are actually on the Banksia plant, and Banksia, along with a couple of other plants, have a really unique quality in that they usually only open up and release the seeds during fires or after bushfires. So, moving on to funny flora and fauna. So, 80% of Australia's animals are unique to Australia, and although some similar or sister species, let's say, can be found in Papua New Guinea, Indonesia, and also in New Zealand. But let's talk about marsupials. They're a special kind of mammal. They give birth to live young, they have a pouch, and they feed their babies with milk. But if we look at an even more interesting subclass of marsupials, that's the platypus and the echidna. On top of having a pouch and feeding their babies with milk, they also lay eggs. And they're the only two monotremes, the only two type of animal of this in the world. And they're both rather shy, so it's quite difficult to get photographs of them. While the echidna photo my father actually took, the platypus one is from a Collective Commons photography website, because unfortunately it's very difficult to get pictures of a platypus in the wild, for example. And then we come to the other marsupials. So as you can see, we have the koala, kangaroos, wombat, the bandicoot is the little guy in the middle, and then the possum. And then we also have the Tasmanian devil, which it makes a very interesting shrieking noise when you go near. There's actually another Tasmanian animal. Does anyone know that has the word Tasmanian in it. Does anyone know what that is? Write it in the chat now if you know. Okay, no comments on that. So it's the Tasmanian tiger, although the thylacine, also known as. There have been some claims that people have seen these in Tasmania recently, but most often they're just overgrown cats, and someone has taken a very blurry picture of it. It's kind of like Bigfoot. People or Nessie, the Loch Ness monster. People always claim to see it. They have a very blurry photo. They usually had a couple of drinks, or they fell off the back of a truck when they saw it. It's a bit, it's one of those things. It's like it's surrounded in myth and legend, a bit like the bunyip, which is a strange creature that is said to live in billabongs of Australia. Okay, and then we come to birds galore. And one of the bird on the top left-hand corner is actually called a lyrebird, Lyre, and they can mimic any sound. If you look on YouTube, there's some really interesting sound clips from the lyrebird. It can mimic or imitate other birds, the sound of a camera click, car siren, anything. And they often fool other birds. They make a mating call of another bird in the forest, and the bird comes looking and they find the lyrebird, hence its name. But they also have a big tail that comes out, kind of like a male peacock. And then we also have the Australian magpie and cockatoos, but we're going to cover that on a further slide. So this is some pictures that my parents have taken in our backyard. Now I grew up in suburbia in Brisbane, so we're not talking about in the middle of the bush in the outback. We're talking about, having a house and a garden, living near shopping malls and swimming pools and schools and that kind of thing. So as you can see, these are some of our friends from the backyard. Now, the possum is eating a piece of fruit. This is actually taken in our backyard, and on the right, the bottom left-hand corner is a tawny frogmouth owl. They typically will stand up in a gum tree and look like a bit of a dead branch there. And on the top right-hand corner, you can see the rainbow lorikeet. These are very noisy, and they eat all your flowers, and if you have any fruit trees in the garden, they'll also devour all of those. Same with the possums. But the blue-tongued lizard and the green tree frog, these were just images I took from a website because, again, they're rather shy and hard to photograph. But we have a blue-tongued lizard living in front of the door to our garage at home, or my parents do rather. And then the green tree frogs, you often find them in the garden. Now, there were lots of other animals that you could find in my parents' garden that I declined to take pictures of or include because they're a bit more scary, like spiders and snakes and goannas and other kinds of lizards. I'm not a big fan of reptiles, so I've spared you all the horror. And here are some of the pets that I grew up with. These aren't actually pictures of those particular birds, but these are the types of them. So we had galahs, which is the pink and grey bird on the top, and then we had the teeny tiny little cockatiels, and my favourite, the cockatoo. My dad actually used to breed these birds when we were kids because he was an environmental scientist, so we hand-reared cockatoos in our house growing up. And coming to talking about strange plants and trees. So here are some names of plants that sound a bit weird. So we have grass trees. Yes, I know, it's a tree that looks like it's grass, and that's on the top left-hand corner of the slide. And then we have the bottle brush. That's the red flower next to the grass tree. We also have the ghost gum tree, which is so called because of its very white trunk. And the kangaroo paw, which is in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen because the flower looks like a kangaroo's paw. Pretty self-explanatory. But what about the scribbly bark? Well, that's the one that has what looks like doodles or scribbles on the bark. And these are actually made from the scribbly gum moth larvae that nest inside the tree. And often as kids we would think that this was some kind of secret message being written in the bark. Sometimes it looks like they've written words or pictures in there. So it was always quite fun to look at those and have a guess at what message were they trying to send us. And here's some of the quite beautiful and I think unusual in terms of when relating to European flowers. We have The gum blossoms, which is the bottom right hand corner, and then the middle, the pink one. These are grow on gum trees, and they can also come in yellow as well. Then we have the waratah, which is the centre red flower. They're very beautiful. And we have the banksia, which is the yellow one. And then we have other types of these other flowers, which are orange and yellow and red. And basically, a lot of flowers are orange, yellow and red in Australia. We don't have many blue or purple ones naturally. Like a lot of Australia, it's orange and yellow and red. The sun, the desert, the drought, the fire. Okay, so now we're going to play a game. This is called How Well Do You Know Your Aussie Slang? Here are 20 Aussie slang words. On the next slide are the answers. See if you can write down what these actually mean. If you know any of them, just write the Aussie slang and then the meaning in the chat now, and Laura will read them out to me if anyone has any clue what they are. Okay, no? So let's have a look. So we have sanger. Any ideas what that could mean? I'm just going to read through them so you can hear how they sound. Sanger, boomer. You might notice that ER at the end of a word in Australian English is not ER. Roadie, servo, brekkie, swag, billabong, arvo, billy, bicky, footy, mozzie, goon, relly, snag, Australia, sunnies, tucker, my favourite, jumbuck, or sickie. So did we have any comments in the chat, Laura?
Yes, we have one comment. No idea.
That's great. That's more fun when you see the answer.
Oh, no. Now there's one. Arvo is afternoon.
Very good. Someone got it right.
Yeah, this was my Penelope Cruz.
Very good. Well, let's have a look at what they meant. So sanger is a sandwich. Can also be called a sambo for little kids. Now, a boomer can be a big wave or a kangaroo. We're not talking about boomers in regards to the generation. We're talking about Aussie slang here. Now, if we have a look back, roadie was next. That's a road trip. And servo, well, it's short for service station, or more commonly in British English, a petrol station. Brekkie, that one's pretty easy. Most people should have got that one, breakfast. And then we have swag, which means a bedroll or a sleeping bag, which traditionally was what the settlers or the people that were moving around when they were working in the outback used to sleep in, out in the open.
Oh,
and yes,
there is one more. Billabong is the pond.
Yes, pond and a dry riverbed. And very good though for knowing that. And arvo, of course, as someone already mentioned, was afternoon. And then the next one, I'm just flipping back so you can see, was billy. Now that's any type of kind of metal can or metal container used over an open fire for making tea or soup or anything like that. And then we had bicky, that's short for biscuit, of course. Footy, in this case it's football, and when I say football I mean rugby, not soccer, just so we're clear. And mozzie, in this case, is mosquito. Goon is a slang word for wine that comes in a box, or cask wine as it's also known. Relly is your relative, so if you're going to the rellies, you're going to your relative's house. And snag, now we're not talking about the 90s sensitive new age guy here, no, we're talking about sausages. And Australia, well, that's what a certain part of the Australian population calls Australia. I'm not one of them.
Cindy says she knew a few of them, like brekkie, mozzie.
She should have written them in there. Cindy should have written them in the chat. Doesn't count now that she's seen them. And sunnies are sunglasses. And tucker, that's also one of my favourite. That means food. And if you have a tucker bag, that was traditionally the swag that the Bushmen carried, and they put all their meat and whatever else they had, dried meat and different kinds of food that they had found in their sack. And a jumbuck is a sheep. And if you've ever listened to the whole song of You'll Come a Waltzing Matilda, which is a very famous national, well, almost the unofficial national anthem in Australia, you'll know that there were plenty of these words in that song, like billabong, tucker, as in tucker bag, swag, because it's a swag man, and the jumbuck, which is a sheep. And in that, the swag man sticks this jumbuck in his tucker bag to eat for later. And the last one, sickie, was sick day. And that one has to be used in the right context. It has to be chuck a sickie. Chuck a sickie means if you need an extra day off from work, you chuck a sickie.
In the next contest, you will have to give more time. There are places that people knew but didn't have time.
Sure. And so, Australian culture and food. I've put a question mark next to this because this is something I'm quite often asked here in Finland. Like, what's the national dish of Australia, or what's a really traditional thing you eat there? And to be honest, it really depends on your cultural background, and I don't just mean your country back, like where your parents come from or where your great-grandparents come from, but also which city do you live in Australia? What kind of cultural influences did your friends have on your life growing up? All of these types of things affect, and do you live in a big city? Do you live in a small town? The availability of different kinds of cuisine and culture and traditions vary from place to place. But all in all, like I mentioned before, Australian culture and food is very heavily influenced through its multilingual, multicultural, diverse population, which means we come up with these fusion foods and fusion cultures, which I think are very great and is one of the reasons that I think Australia is such a great international environment. But are there any questions so far?
There are just comments on the greatness of learning the new words.
Cool. Okay. But I can mention, like I said, there's been Australian food culture has been heavily influenced by many, many different cultures. As I mentioned briefly at the beginning, we had a lot of migration from Italy and Greece, particularly in the middle of last century, which heavily influenced the culture, and especially food. In more recent times, we've had a high volume of people coming to study, as well as moving permanently to Australia from the Asian region, and nowadays also from Africa. So all of these heavily influence the food and culture. Food festivals and cultural festivals are really big in Australia. Where I grew up in Brisbane, we have the Panegyri Festival every year, which is a massive festival about Greek food and culture, and it's amazing. It was actually right next to my high school where I went to. And all of these types of things happen all over Australia. And actually, surprisingly, if we took singing, because we're coming from Finnish-British, and I'm a Aussie myself, there's actually Finnish language schools operating all around Australia, and there are also these Scandinavian food festivals and small stores that sell karilampirakka and lörtsu and lihapirakka. And at Christmas we would get together and put on Christmas plays for the old Finnish people who live in the retirement home there, which was actually a Finnish language retirement home in Brisbane called Finlandia Village, where they often recruit Finnish speaking staff from abroad too. So all of these types of things were very common and still are growing up in Australia in the bigger cities such as Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane, of course. And this is because a lot of Finnish people emigrated to Australia during the middle of last century because of the different situations going on around the world. And the cultural traditions have been kept up. There are also a lot of people coming from Eastern Europe in the last 50 years, and that can also be heavily seen in different parts of the country. And I'd like to point out that I've mentioned Sydney, Brisbane and Melbourne. These are the three biggest cities which are all located along the east coast of Australia, and most of the population live between these areas. Australia is such a big country, as we remember from before when we looked at the map, but the vast majority of it is desert, which is uninhabited.
How about BBQ?
There's
a suggestion, is that the ultimate Australian tradition?
Well, I mean, barbecuing is a big part of a lot of Australians' lifestyle, but it's not everyone. And like I said, I'm not talking about only white Australian culture. There's Chinese Australian culture, there's Indian Australian culture, there's every other possible nation under the sun who have come, Greek Australian, there's, everything. So, of course, and there are these fusion foods. You can get like a Korean barbecue, you can have Korean Australian barbecue, like one of my friend's families actually. There's a Syrian, Greek, Korean barbecues that they have mixture from all over there. So it makes for some very interesting times and interesting get-togethers. And I think that's part of the thing that I love most about Australia, is that it is such a diverse country in terms of everything. Land, people, language, food, the best. And so we've come to the part where I'm going to ask whether there are any more questions, or else I'm going to end with my famous snakebite story to scare you all to death so you'll never want to come to Australia again.
At the moment I can't see any new questions, so perhaps we go on to the scary bit.
Yes. So I purposely...
If I may ask a question.
Sure.
You mentioned about the floods that are happening now, and that's also on the east coast.
Yes.
So how from where? Is it far north or?
It's from the southern states. So Queensland's, let me bring up the map again so you can see what we're talking about. I'll just flip back to the superimposed map. I'm sorry, I don't have it. If we look at the map here on the right, you can see that this obviously doesn't have the states marked, but the bit with the triangle is Queensland. Underneath there is New South Wales and then Victoria. So we're talking about in parts of New South Wales and Victoria. Around, for example, my cousin lives in Newcastle, or the Newcastle area, and she's currently stranded. They live in like acreage in the farmland on a dirt road. And they were threatened by the bushfires last year and now by the floods. So it's very serious. People have lost their lives, livestock have been killed, houses have washed away, crops are completely devastated. All of these things have a big impact on the Australian economy, and I mean, we all know what the situation is at the moment, so I'm not going to go into that with COVID, but all of these natural disasters in the past few years, and I think it was a couple of weeks ago there was a big storm in North Queensland that completely wiped out all the banana crops, so now the prices of bananas are going to go bananas. So moving back...
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem, happy to answer. And just going back to the question slide, like I said, I don't like to put pictures of scary creatures in here, and I'm terrified of snakes. And the reason for that isn't just because they're vile, nasty reptiles. It's because when I was 16, I was camping on an island just off Brisbane. It's called Stradbroke Island, very beautiful place, and very important in terms of cultural and Indigenous history as well. People live on the island. And I was camping with friends, and we went to the beach. And I stood on a snake and got bitten, and you think, oh yeah, that's not so bad. Well, it was, because it was one of the most deadly snakes in the world. Australia has 8 of the 10 most deadly snakes in the world, just in case you're wondering. I'm sure you weren't, but... So it was the tiger snake, and it was only a little tiny baby one, but because it hadn't obviously killed any prey before, it was full of venom, just waiting to bite me. And it bit me on the foot, and then I had a really unfun adventure. I had very bad symptoms straight away. I walked like about 10 metres to get away from the snake, even though technically you're not supposed to move once you get bitten by a snake. And then I elevated my leg, I put compression on my foot, like I tied a towel around it so that the venom wouldn't spread. And then they called an ambulance. But because we're on an island, the ambulance was just a little tiny jeep. And she asked me, oh, what kind of snake bit you? And I said, well, brown, because it was brown in colour, and she thought I meant a brown snake, which is brown with a capital B, which is also the other most deadly snake in Australia. But to be fair, most snakes in Australia are brown or black, so there wasn't a lot of different options here. So then I got taken down to the city on the island. Then I got airlifted in a helicopter to the to an emergency room on the mainland, and then the adventure continued. I ended up in intensive care. I was allergic to the snake antivenom. I spent 2 weeks in hospital. You know, at 16, at the end of the school year, that's not really how you want to spend your holidays, the summer holidays, mind you, because our school ends in December. And then, yeah, you know, things got better from there. But after that, I didn't like reptiles before that. Cannot stand them. I can't even look at a picture of one right now. Same, and hairy spiders is my other thing that I can't stand. So that's why one of the reasons that I didn't include all the scary things in this talk, like all the things in the sea that can kill you. Sharks and jellyfish and different kinds of octopi. And then of course all the snakes and spiders, etc. Because I thought this would be a more positive aspect and a different, more personalised view of Australia.
But you see here is actually there is a comment on more scary stories, please. Perhaps another story of snakes?
Well, I don't have any other stories with snakes, but I can tell you that magpies, like Australian magpies, I can go back to the picture. Let's just flip back so you know what I'm talking about. I think I included it. Did I not? Maybe I didn't end up putting it in. Anyway, I'll add it to the slides before we upload them under the YouTube video. So a magpie is a black and white bird, as it is in a lot of other places. And in nesting season, they swoop. Where the male and the female swoop anybody or any animal walking underneath their baby's nest. And they don't just swoop you, they clack their beak at you and they try to peck your eyes out, which is very terrifying, I can tell you. There are lots of birds in Australia will swoop you if you go near their nest, even in urban areas like outside your house or in the primary school yard. Yes?
And is there some kind of strategy that people use to stop the magpies from swooping at them?
One can be that if you wear a hat and draw eyes on the top of your head. It doesn't always work though, and that can also apply for like being attacked by butcher birds too. But again, they're pretty smart and they realise that you're, you know, they're not really your eyes.
And one other question was, did you ever find out what kind of snake bit you?
A tiger snake, or a snake from the tiger family, because when they swabbed the wound, they said that it was from the tiger family. So there are more than one kind of tiger snake that's particularly what it was. So if you dare, Google it and you'll see what I'm talking about. I leave that horror for you to check by yourself.
There's another question on a different topic. Are there Finnish saunas in Australia?
Yes, actually, we have one of them. My parents have one of them. My dad built it outside back in 1998. Got the most important part of the sauna. What do you think that is? Write it in the comments now if you know what the most important part of the sauna is that you can't easily get in Australia. Okay, so it's of course the sauna stove. My uncle put it in his suitcase and brought it 15,000 kilometres across the country, across the globe. And in the beginning we didn't actually have the structure. So how do you think Aussies make a sauna when they don't actually have the building? In a tent, of course, sitting on a surfboard in the backyard. So we would go in the swimming pool and then sit in the tent on the surfboard in front of the sauna stove. It was quite hot already. And then eventually my dad built one in the backyard, like a proper sauna. It was quite small, but you know, all wood and self-sufficient and everything, electric. And I think it's still in use today. So, and it's not the only one, because I mean, obviously the biggest difference between saunas in Finland and in other countries is if you go to one in like a health spa or a resort or a hotel or something in Australia, most of the time they're infrared these days and you have to wear full clothes. You cannot go naked. And of course, if there are, and some of them are on a timer, you press the button, it goes on for 30 minutes and then it turns off. And they're usually accompanied by a sign that says, no throwing water allowed. It damages the stove and will short circuit the electricity. So unfortunately that's something a lot of Finns often miss in Australia. But on the other hand, on the days, and nowadays with global warming, outdoors in summer is almost as hot as a cold sauna anyway, with temperatures getting up to 50 degrees. So you could just sit outside in the sun for a few minutes and you'll get just as red and hot and sweaty as you would go into a sauna here.
There's a question related to your dad's greatness as a sauna builder. Was he born in Finland?
Yes. He's born in Finland, and my parents met when they were travelling, and then he's also a carpenter. Like, he does a lot of construction. He can, renovate houses, build houses, and all kinds of things with bricks and wood and fixing electronic stuff. So he's very handy in that sense. So building a sauna, that was nothing.
And where in Finland is your family from? The Finnish side of your family?
From around partly from around eastern Finland, like the Savonlinna area, but my dad actually moved to Helsinki when he was a kid, so he grew up in Helsinki in the suburbs around Malmi area, so yes. And I'm true to nature, I live in the same kind of suburbs still today. Okay. And were there any last questions?
Just comments on that. It would be great to visit Australia after this presentation. Wouldn't
it just? I'm longing to go back. I was there in December 2019, but currently it's not possible because of the travel restrictions, unfortunately. But I will say this, if you're less than 30, it's a working holiday visa is easy to get as a Finnish citizen. You can also get reciprocal healthcare in Australia under the Keller and Medicare agreement. And if you work in the farms, etc., you can actually get a second year working holiday visa quite easily. Otherwise, you can go for 3 months and have fun, but a couple of things, you need you need more than 2 weeks, you need a lot of money and a lot of patience when it comes to the transport, because we don't have very good public transport, long distance public transport infrastructures. On the east coast there is the train, but mostly it's buses or domestic flights, and it takes a long time to get anywhere. In Finland you can drive from Helsinki to Lapland in the same day, less than 24 hours. In Australia, you can drive for 2 days straight and you're still in the same country from coast to coast because it's 4,000 kilometres. So, yeah.
And, one question that I may ask is how, for you, what's the biggest difference between Finland and Australia? What do you think is really different that would surprise Australians when they come to Finland and Finns when they go to Australia?
That's without going into politics, etc. I think lack of diversity in Finland, although I've been here 12 years now and it is getting more diverse. That was actually something that really shocked me in the beginning. It took about 2 years for me to kind of get used to that. I think also how efficient, talking Helsinki, how efficient the public transport system is. In Australia, and people say Finland's expensive, but just about everything is more expensive in most places in Australia. Especially having accommodation. I think food, going out is a lot easier there, going to restaurants if you live in a city, because there's a lot more variety and it can be cheaper because of competition, especially when it comes to international food, like Asian food and things like that. So that's something I really miss, and the weather, of course. That's the biggest shock coming here. From where I grew up in Brisbane, we don't have winter. Our winter is warmer than Finnish summer, so that was a big shock coming here. Down south in Victoria, they have some snow, as I mentioned, in the Australian Alps, and there are some skiing resorts. But usually if Australians want to ski, they go to Japan or New Zealand, so. And I guess how many lakes there are in Finland, because again, I mentioned we don't really technically have lakes. We have rivers and some ponds and some places that are called lakes, but they're not really classified for technical reasons. They're not really considered to be lakes. And we have these big salt flats in the middle of the desert, which apparently used to be an inland sea, and now it's just desert with salt on top of it. So I think the nature is very different too. The types of trees, the types of animals you see. Here I'm always scared when I go to the summer cottage that a bear's going to eat me. In Australia that's about the only thing. I've never seen a snake in Finland, but in Australia everything wants to kill you. Any final questions, and then we'll.
I think everybody is now digesting in their minds
no
all the exciting things they heard.
I'll just take a sip of water then in that case. And as I mentioned, I obviously went to primary school and high school in Australia, and then I worked for a number of years before moving to Finland. So I think actually working culture is something, when you asked me a moment ago, Dharmender, about the biggest differences. Especially, and kind of the power distance between people in schools. You call your teacher Mr. or Miss last name, so Mr. Smith, Mrs. Robertson, and even some cases like when you're working, especially in corporate environments, there's a big power distance between trainees or, people who've just been recruited and they're like 18 or 20 and then the big boss. There's a lot of power distance, so, and how they speak to you and treat you and how you should, show respect to them. And it's very different than here. It's not like, and it's much like I said, in a corporate environment, it's much more formal than in like a cultural organisation or perhaps in a not-for-profit community-based organisation. And travelling, because to go anywhere from Australia, you have to hop on a plane. So, Australians love to travel because we've got to get on a plane to go anywhere. So if we come to Europe, we go everywhere, or Asia, or North America, or South America, Africa, because it takes so long. It takes basically 24 hours to get anywhere outside of like Oceania and parts of Asia. So you gotta like sitting on a plane, but luckily we have long distance.
About distances, there's a question, will you stay in Finland or go back someday?
That's a big question. I mean, I've been here 12 years now, and actually I came here on a holiday with a backpack and I never went home, so I had planned to kind of go back to Australia a couple of years ago and spend, my dream is to spend kind of half the year in Finland and part of the year in Australia and kind of be a digital nomad, because to be honest, I really dislike winter. I do not like the cold, I do not like the dark, and especially the slipperiness, and when it snows vertically. So I could do without that. My dream is to have chasing summer forevermore.
Thank you a lot, Saana. I'm sure everybody appreciated this really much, especially in these times when we cannot travel. It's wonderful to travel in our imaginations, and you really help us with that. So thank you a lot.
Thank you very much, Laura. And I've added my email address here if anyone wants to contact me with any further questions. And then I've just put the photo credits, the Kallioinen family. And then also there were some particular ones like the wombat and the platypus and a few others that were from Unsplash and Pixabay, which are obviously Creative Commons. Under the Creative Commons licenses, you can use these for even for commercial purposes without naming individually each photographer. But thank you very much. I hope it was interesting. It was very enjoyable to share these things with you. And
there was a comment from one of the audience that that's how she arrived to Finland over 40 years ago, and now she has children and a grandchild.
Great. Well, I don't have children or a grandchild yet.
No, but it's less than 40 years yet.
I've got another 28 still, so plenty of time for that.
And as a token of our appreciation, we would like to offer you something to drink with an Australian touch, namely some cafe Sydney.
Oh, lovely. Thank you so much. I've tried this actually. It's really good. We used to have it at our workplace.
And yellowtail.
My favourite. Thank you. I love Australian wine. That's one of the biggest things, and it's even better when it comes in a box.
We don't have a box, but we have a bag, so perhaps.
Thank you very much, Laura.
Thank you.
And thank you, Dharmender and Nora here. They're our techie team here in the office. Thank you, everyone, and enjoy your spring.